Hello, YouTube. Dr. Miller here. I got an interesting video today. I'm going to talk to you about testosterone. Before I do, though, smack the bell for notifications. That's important, I guess. You don't have to like the video yet. You don't have to make that kind of commitment. Go ahead and watch it first. And then, of course, subscribe to my channel. Check out my other videos on a range of topics, journal clubs, book reviews, I guess, all kinds of stuff, including videos like this one where I talk about a particular subject and maybe just something to think about. So I picked up this article called History of Testosterone Therapy Through the Ages. I'm not going to do a journal club review on it because it's more just like what it sounds. It's history. It's a narrative of kind of the backstory of where it's just not a very long article of how we got to today in modernity in terms of testosterone therapy and some of them, the thoughts about testosterone from I'll say antiquity, right, all the way back to the Romans. Certainly that's antiquity, and even before that, I should say. And then, through kind of the modern era, in the last 125 years or so, how the discovery of isolation of testosterone, and then even before it was identified as testosterone, there was this weird substance that seemed to promote vitality and so forth and so forth. Okay, so a little backstory though. I did my dissertation topic on endocrine function and weight training, and that was a huge mistake. I would never do that again. I didn't know anything. That's not true. I knew a little bit about endocrinology, but I didn't know much about it. And I thought, this is, I'm one of those knuckleheads that I'll be like, I don't know much about that. Let's just go figure it out. Or I want to learn more. And so I stupidly did this. And the reason I say stupidly is because if you are familiar with endocrinology, if you spend any time with it, you know that is the most tangled web. Or at least one of the most tangled webs, and not they're like the brain and everything, but because you're talking about signaling, and there's so many signals constantly being sent through our bodies in various forms, whether it's at the tissue level or cellular level, the tissue level, or all the way out into what we think of as traditional endocrinology, and that's kind of an umbrella term, which is one organ communicating with another through things like cortisol or testosterone. Okay, so I'm at least a little familiar with endocrinology, and that's why I wanted to talk about this topic as well, and the topic of testosterone. All right. So what do I want to say about testosterone? Well, again, this article was a really interesting, and just some of the history of it, and it's worth picking up. Again, did I mention the article is The History of Testosterone Therapy Through the Ages? Yeah. By Mary Rostam. She's from Johns Hopkins. This was published in Nature, and it was published in 2022. So shortly, I just happened to pick this up on one of the web services that I subscribe to that sends me interesting articles that I'm interested in, right? Hi, I'd like to introduce myself to myself. Anyway, Department of Redundancy Department. So these are my thoughts on testosterone, okay? Because there's a lot of interest in it for various reasons right now. And I'm going to be talking mostly about men, okay? That doesn't mean if you're not a man, you don't have, you might not find this interesting. It's just, it's going to relate to men because testosterone is, right, the driving hormone behind secondary sex characteristics of men. It comes from the Leydig cells of the testes, and I say Leydig cells. I've heard it said other ways, but in the testes. That doesn't mean women don't make testosterone. It just means it's just fractional compared to that of what men make. And women tend to make it through another biochemical pathway through androstenedione, which was a very popular hormone back in the 90s. If you ever want to see a tangled web, just look at the testosterone family tree, as I call it. And many times, like DHEA, some of these other pro hormones that are in the tree, most of these are banned now. There's more danger in taking those though than just taking anabolic steroids. I'm not promoting anabolic steroid use at all because there is a 1990 Steroids Act that makes it a federal crime to take anabolic steroids. I myself am not a fan of anabolic steroids. Many strength coaches and others have said, well, we should just allow some of it, but it's such a slippery slope. Either way, you're hosed. People are going to cheat, or people, if you made it legal, are going to go all out and hurt themselves. They're doing it anyway. I mean, that's a tangled web. I don't want to necessarily talk about that. In sports and performance, I don't want to go down that road with this video. What I'm trying to get at is, what about testosterone now for the average everyday man? And the things that we've seen in terms of testosterone levels over time. Does testosterone matter that much? So let's start there. Does testosterone matter that much? Well, I mentioned some exogenous forms of it. So there's a classic study, 1996, Bassian. That's how I pronounce his last name. It's probably incorrect. From New England Journal of Medicine, kind of the classic testosterone anabolic steroid study. There was 4 groups, and one group just lifted weights. One group did nothing, of course. One group lifted weights. One group did nothing and took anabolic steroids. I think it was 1,200 milligrams of anathenane. I'm trying to remember anymore. It's been a while. And then the other group lifted and took roids. Okay. And I'll say roids there. That's such a 90s word. The group that lifted weights and did not take anabolic steroids had a similar result of those that didn't do anything and took steroids. Okay. Obviously the ones that did anabolic, and I should make sure I say anabolic steroids. Steroids is just a class, right? Cortisol is a steroid, but it's not anabolic by any means. At least not directly, right? Anyway, again, this is a tangled web. This is why I feel like I have to qualify everything when I talk about hormones, and I don't make many videos talking about them. But the group that took anabolic steroids and lifted obviously saw superior results compared to the other 4 groups. So we know exogenous, meaning outside the normal bandwidth of, there's a bandwidth of hormones. Like when they test athletes, they have to be within a bandwidth. And there's certain subsets of testosterone as well. It's not just generic. It's not just general testosterone or total testosterone. There's subcategories that are more potent forms. And again, I'm not going to go down all those rabbit holes, but I'm just going to use the word testosterone here. And when you think about it, just think about secondary sex characteristics, strength, power, sexual vitality, recovery, all those things related to what we know of testosterone and the secondary sex characteristics of men. Okay, men have more testosterone than women by far because of the presence of testes. This is an anatomical difference. Okay. Now, again, there can be exogenous uses of testosterone, of course, but that doesn't change the fact that men make testosterone at a significantly higher amount than women do. So when I'm thinking about this article and just thinking about my history of working with, looking at testosterone and weight training in particular, I was looking at cortisol and testosterone levels with weight training, different types of weight training and sequences of weight training and what seemed to be better. Testosterone, this is what I find interesting. There's more men, I feel comfortable saying this, on testosterone therapies. I'm not saying they're bad or good. I'm just saying on testosterone therapy than there ever has been before. And a lot of that just has to do with the fact that we know what testosterone is. From this article, it talks about the history of testosterone, and we know, how much the bandwidth should be, and we know testosterone is linked to vitality in men across the spectrum of health things. Whether that's, sexual function, strength, recovery, all the things I mentioned before, vigor, aggressiveness. Okay. What do we see in our culture? We see more men on testosterone therapy. And this is what I'm getting at. If you see my video on over-medicated society, okay. Well, the question is, why are more men on testosterone? Well, if when we look at where testosterone is, when it's produced, okay, in men, there's always, hormones typically don't just level off. They have pulsatile releases, okay? That's why it's hard to study hormones, as I found out, is, if you study growth hormone at night, most times when we release growth hormone when we're asleep, besides when we resistance train, and specifically, or do some high-intensity activity, growth hormones released, if you caught a time when you weren't seeing a pulsatile release of growth hormone, you could say there's no growth hormone released at night. You have to have somebody hooked up to something that's constantly taking the blood concentrations of a particular hormone in order to detect it. Otherwise, you could, the peak could be here, but you measured it down here, and you're like, it's low testosterone. It's like, well, yeah, but you missed the actual peak. Okay, so you have to have this constant sampling going on in order to make inferences about hormones. That's a really hard part about testing them. And so anyway, we get these pulsatile releases naturally. A lot of times at night, right, is when we have those. But the other time when we can get testosterone increases, and this goes from most of the hormones that are related to what's called the counter-regulatory hormones to insulin, is during training. And specifically, weight training is very effective at releasing testosterone. Now, that doesn't mean distance running doesn't. It doesn't mean working hard doesn't. And that's what I'm kind of getting at here is testosterone's released as a result of work. The harder you work as a man, the more testosterone you make. More testosterone you make. Same with a woman as well. But again, significantly higher in men because it's a male hormone. Okay? And so significantly higher levels of testosterone are released. Now, if let's say the modern boy, post-puberty, okay, what are they doing now? Not a lot of work. Now, that doesn't mean every kid, but if you look at your average city dweller, they're not doing a lot of work. And I don't mean like work as like earning money work. I'm talking about like playing on the playground. They're not lifting things and throwing them over their head. They're not running down a hallway. They're not running outside. They're not playing with their friends. They're not punching a kid in the face and getting punched in the face, right? I'm not advocating violence, but I'm just saying that's part of being a young man typically is learning how, right, to be tough and learning how to get into scraps and also doing work, moving, not just sports. Sports are great, but I'm actually just finished up a book that I wrote. This is one meant to be a book promotion, by the way. Kind of tackling this issue of modern adults don't know how to act anymore. And children can teach us how to act if we let them be children. And we can take lessons from children on how to be well. And that's for men and women. So anyway, and imagine this young boy then grows up, is not very active, and then maybe plays sports a little bit, but then he goes off and becomes an office worker. How much work has he done over his lifetime compared to a young boy that has the privilege, right? And I use that word not in the weird sort of modernity way, but like it was a privilege for him to grow up on a farm. It was great for him to do that. Not everybody gets to do that. But that kid might say this wasn't a privilege, but had to do some of the farm chores, had to feed the animals, had to help dad and mom with the chores on the farm, and had to help dad out in the farm, and so on and so forth. He did work, okay? And then that young man becomes a trade worker. So I'm just going to use this example, is a plumber, and is always active and moving and picking things up and moving them around, okay? Now, this is anecdotal, but you will look at that tradesman, okay, that had that background, or the farmer or whatever, and you will see more masculine characteristics and strength and vitality and recovery in those individuals than you'll see in office workers. I'm an office worker now. I'm not ripping on office work. What I am trying to highlight is, like so many times, especially in the world of men, we've over-medicated men with testosterone, when the reality is it's tied to modernity. There's a lot of other factors people hypothesize, like the chemicals in products and things like that have lowered testosterone levels. And there's been a well-documented and very interesting, just looking at general testosterone levels in men. The modern man has the testosterone levels and this is a few years ago when I looked at this, the same testosterone levels roughly as an older man, 50 to 100 years ago. So like basically modern man has the same testosterone levels in their younger years, so I would fall in that bracket, as their grandfather did. And you probably can go back another generation. So why is this testosterone being lost? It's because we don't move anymore, okay? Now, how do we recover this? How do I recover this as somebody who's an office worker? One of the simplest ways and one of the fastest ways to recover this is to lift weights. Lift weights. Yes, just general activity, but if you don't have that choice, you're like, man, I can't move around that. Lift weights. Okay. And a lot of times lifting weights is like, well, I want to look super jacked. Okay, fine. I want to lose weight. Good idea if you need to. But it's also tied to higher T levels. And higher T levels then are related to being a better man in terms of physiological function. Doesn't mean you'll be a better man or better father or something like that, or a better husband. That's going to take some other kinds of work. But physiologically, those things do help you to be those other things, like a good defender, like a good leader, like an aggressive, in a control leader, like a good father, right? I mean, those, because you're not exhausted, you're not depleted, okay? Lift weights. This is probably the best supplement that you could do for yourself if you're a man, is lift weights. Secondary would be eat protein, okay? Lift weights, eat protein, okay? So not only are you promoting testosterone release, which is going to be, it's like having a testosterone therapy session every single time, and it raises all the levels of maleness that we're interested in raising, okay? But it's going to promote just general strength increases as well, so you can lift more weights, and you feel more confident and more comfortable. And you could be starting at very different places. You could be like, I've never touched a weight in my life. Start now, okay? You don't have to go in there and smash big back squats. I'm just talking about lifting weights. They don't have to even be dumbbells if you want to. We could just get more generic resistance training, do some band training, do something that promotes strenuous activity in the sense of that you're being resisted, not necessarily running, even that's better than nothing, but something that's more in the resistance training realm, okay? So, many times we fall into this trap is like, what? I don't want to be in these gender norms and so on and so forth. No, these gender norms in many cases are good things. We need to lift weights as men, okay? Especially those that don't have jobs that promote testosterone release, okay? And I know it's like, wow, that doesn't sound very postmodern of me, but I don't care, because that's the reality. This is physiology. This is human physiology. And I'm telling you, testosterone levels are lower now because men don't work. And many times older men tend to retire from life. That's like the goal of a man, to retire from working. That's a bad idea for a man, right? Again, I'm talking to men right now. I'm not saying what women should do. I'm talking to men, because the less we move, the less testosterone we have. They had an older gentleman. He was in his 60s, and he'd been overweight for a long period of time, and he started lifting weights. And the thing, I was a little bit younger at the time, so I was like, but because I was lifting weights already too. But he was like, the hormones. He'd always tell me that. Yeah, he had a strong accent. He was a great guy, which doesn't have anything to do with the story, but he was a great guy. Is a great guy. But he's like, the hormones. He said, I see all my friends that, they're doing all these other things and they're not healthy. And he said, man, I'm lifting and I just feel like a new man. Like this is hormone therapy for those that are not in the trades, not moving, not right exercising their bodies. And I'm not talking about exercise in the essential, like the structured 30 minutes a day. I'm talking about just in the generic sense of moving. So I just read this article and it made me think of these things. I don't think I'm going on a limb here to say men overall, okay? Men overall are weaker than they were 50 years ago. The generation of men I grew up in, and we're so afraid of men being strong anymore because we're afraid they're going to abuse their power. And that's a reality. That's happened. But it takes strong men to tell those men to stop it, right? And I've seen just a lack of strength in men physically, and in terms of courage. And I think a lot of it's tied to it can be not all of it, but a lot of it's tied to we just don't move anymore. If testosterone gives us our strength, and I'm talking about not just physically, but gives us our aggressiveness, and I don't mean that because that word has been butchered as well. I don't mean like going out and hitting people on the street. I'm talking about aggressiveness and protecting people, protecting your family, and standing up for what's right and standing for what's good, right? We've lost that as men, as at least in a large group, not every man. Again, and you could say, well, how do you define manly? But I'm going to use that term here because it's related to testosterone. Okay, the most manly men I see typically are people working in the trades that are running a business, right? Basically, men that are physically moving around. Now, I've seen manly men that work in offices. If you're watching this, you're like, you jerk, did you call me not a manly man? No, I'm not at all. And again, this idea of manly man has many different inroads that we could discuss, and I'm not going to go down that road. But what I am saying is, like, if I was just to pick a group of men right now that are exhibiting more male characteristics and leadership and strength, most of the time they're in men who are physically active. And that's what I'm getting after. Now, again, for people like me and maybe you, if you're an office worker or you're a student or you can't get in, you're not doing a lot of that work. I'm not saying you have to be a plumber to be a man. That's not what I'm saying. What I am saying, though, is we need a supplement. And we shouldn't rely on supplements to do it. Those supplements have downsides as well. Okay? Instead, we should lift weights. So I'm about promoting movement, and this is, I think, such an important thing for men to hear is you need to move and preferably lift weights. All right? So I'm sure I stepped on some landmines there, and I'll be honest with you, I don't really care. Like, truth is truth, and I feel confident that everything I said in this video is true. There may be some, I hate this word, but there may be some nuances in what I said, but we need more men. And I'm talking about men that'll do the right things. I'm not talking about men that go out and try to be machismo. I'm not talking about machismo. I'm talking about men. And again, if you want to help regain some of your manliness as a man, start lifting weights. Start lifting weights. Start with 2 times a week if you haven't been doing anything. If you've been lifting weights, keep lifting weights. If your shoulders hurt, because find some other way to lift weights. Use machines. Guard those joints and plow ahead on the other joints that do work still. Find a good trainer and a good program to help lead you through a program that won't just, crush your soul and mind and spirit, but has an actual progression to it. If you're older, especially. If you're old like me and beat up, well, I need a progression and maybe I can't work out as hard as I did when I was 25, but I can still train, and it still matters today to get our testosterone levels up. The last thing I'll say about testosterone, I know I've been rambling now for almost 20 minutes, is some of these research that looks at acute testosterone release. So the classic study I can think of, and I can't remember the authors, forgive me, is it was a study on wrestlers. Maybe I've mentioned this on this channel, I don't remember. But they looked at wrestlers pre and post match. And the wrestlers who won had more testosterone released as a result of the match. Okay? Well, the inference could be that, well, those wrestlers had higher T levels, so they won. Remember what testosterone is released from? It's released from work. So it could be that the wrestlers that won the match just worked harder than the ones who didn't. And so they won the match and they released more testosterone as a result of the extra work they were able to perform for whatever reason. They're either mentally tougher or they're physically better shape or whatever. Whatever the reason or reasons are, that's what went on. Okay? And so, you know, when you look at these acute studies, sometimes you have to like, what you really want to see, and this goes for anything, diet or whatever it is, you can't eat one blueberry and be like, okay, I'm healthy now. You have to eat lots of blueberries every day. I'm just using blueberries as an example, to gain the benefits of health from blueberries or fruit or whatever, okay? The same thing with testosterone. One good blast of testosterone, even if somebody did something illegal and had an exogenous dose, that one blast is going to be great, but it's going to wear off. And that's the same for these medications. I know some of them are pellets and they're slow release and so forth, but eventually that'll run out if you can't afford it because it's very expensive, right? Lifting, though, you can do consistently is what I'm getting at. And if you stay with it, it's not going to be like I lifted once and, you know, if you haven't been doing anything, you probably feel a lot better after you work through the soreness, to be honest with you. But it's consistency over time. It's years of accumulation of testosterone exposure that builds the muscle mass. Like, you know, a young boy who goes through puberty, it's years of that exposure to testosterone that makes him very muscular at 25 if he's been lifting, okay? That doesn't mean if you're 25 and haven't lifted that you can't be muscular or more muscular. That's, of course, if you're 70, you can be more muscular than you are now if you haven't been lifting. But the point is, what I'm trying to get is the total exposure. So even 2 times a week, done every week, consistently, is going to be better than I'm going to crush the gym for 5 days a week and I only did it for 3 weeks and then I didn't do it now for, you know, 4 months. Even if it's one compound movement a day, okay? Dan John's Busy Man's Training, right? And that can apply to women as well. But I'm just going to, again, I'm talking mostly about men here. And he titled it The Busy Man's, right, training schedule, okay? The Busy Man. So, you know, that his training was just do one exercise a day. And preferably a compound movement, like a bent over row, a bench, squat, dead, variant, or whatever, okay? If all you have time is to do biceps curl, do biceps curls. That's better than nothing. You will get a testosterone release as a result of that. Okay. That's all I got today. I think, again, this article, if you have the chance to pick it up, it's, again, not very long. I don't think it's public domain, but if you have access to a library, it's just an interesting little article. Again, it's called History of Testosterone Therapy Through the Ages by Rostam et al. In Nature and the IJIR, Your Sexual Medicine Journal. Then it has, a citation, of course, but I won't read that to you. Y'all have a good day. I'll see you in the next video.